Okay, let's take a look at some of the history of the discovery of cells and how they fit into biology. Um, Pretty long ago, several hundred years ago, um, the first observation of cells were made, and when these were originally seen, they were from a very thin slice of cork. And so these cells were dead and they were empty. When cork dries out, it leaves behind cellulose compartments. And you can almost see these with a magnifying glass if you look really carefully. And there's nothing really in these. And when Hooke saw these, he thought they looked like cells that you might see in a monastery. At the time, Christian monks lived in monasteries with very, very small, simple rooms, and they had no possessions and they were empty. And that's what it reminded him of. So that's where we get the word cell from. Um, Today, we use that as sort of like jail cell. So 1665, and then we're gonna jump forward a couple hundred years here. Um, at this time, we see a big jump in the ability of microscopes to look at things. We have better lenses, we have better machining, which gives us more and more accuracy. So a lot of times when you see a big technological jump, you'll see a lot of discoveries happen very quickly, and that's what we have here. So we have Brown, who sees a nucleus for the first time in 1833. Just a few years later, we see the discovery that all plants are made out of cells, and this is kind of a big deal, and we'll talk about why. Then we see that all animals are made out of cells, and both Schleiden and Schwann have particular kinds of cells named after them. And anatomists are trying to move away from naming structures after individuals who discovered them. They're trying to give more descriptive names, but usually you see both still in use, sort of a name that's descriptive and a name that's named after discoverer. Um, Schwann cells are part of nerves. But anyway, the idea that all life was made out of cells was kind of a big deal. You know, before we understood what cells were, we knew that there were organs just from butchering animals for, thousands of years in even human dissection. But we didn't realize that the basic units in animals and plants were the same thing. So this was kind of a big deal to see that, hey, everything that's alive has this in common. So before this time, we weren't really sure about that. And so to have this unifying sort of idea that everything's made out of a cell, to us that seems really basic, but at the time this was a really important discovery. And so that led to what we call cell theory, and this is the idea that everything that's alive is made out of cells. And like I said, big deal that a plant has cells and an animal has cells. Those are all really, like I said, things we take for granted, but at the time in the past, that was a big deal. So what we saw was that below cells, we didn't really see a functional set of operations. So because of this, we call the cell the most basic unit of life. There are things smaller than cells, like viruses, but a lot of people, most people agree that those are not alive. And the idea also came that all cells come from other cells, and that includes, a new life like a single-celled organism dividing, as well as growth. So just remember that almost all, other than a few things that divide as multicellular organisms, almost all things that come from a sperm and egg are started as one cell. So it's kind of neat to think of you started from one cell. There's a different couple types of cells that we separate out, and you've probably heard of this before: prokaryote and eukaryotes. Karyo means nugget or nut, so those are the ones we see with a nucleus. Prokaryotes don't have a nucleus. Let's take a look at some of the differences between those. Both of them have membranes, and when we say that, we mean an outer membrane, because this is going to become kind of important here and something I want to explain to you. They both have cytosol, which is sort of that jelly substance that just kind of fills that membrane and holds things in place. There's a lot of water in that. And both have ribosomes. So both prokaryotes and eukaryotes have these things in common. Let's take a look at what we mean by membrane-bound organelles. Okay, so let me draw. This will be my eukaryotic cell. We'll put an E there. This will be my prokaryotic cell. We'll put a P there for prokaryote. So this is my eukaryote, this is my prokaryote. Over here, we have a nucleus. Well, what holds that nucleus together? That's going to be a membrane. So this is a membrane, and this is a membrane, and this is a membrane. So all three of these are membranes, but we're going to find out that eukaryotes only have these internal membranes. You wouldn't see this over here. So this is going to be full of DNA. Over here, it's just kind of floating in the middle in what we call nucleoid region. There's nothing holding it together, though. There's no membrane wrapped around it. You might see a membrane around something called the mitochondria, which you've probably heard of already. What does this allow you to do? This allows you to specialize in different chemical functions. By having everything happen in a compartment, concentrations are higher, chemical reactions aren't mixing with everything that's happening in the cell, so you gain a lot more efficiency. Over here in the prokaryotes, they're not really having that, but they still are life, they still are alive. They both have ribosomes, so that's something they have in common, these little protein factories, but the prokaryotic ribosomes are a little smaller. In some of the ribosomes in eukaryotes are bound to different organelles, and we'll talk about that as we get into it. Okay, let me wipe that. Okay, here's just a couple photos of these. You've got these are not the same scale, but you don't see any definitive regions in here inside of membranes over here, except the outer side. Over here in eukaryotes, you can see the nucleus is really well defined by a membrane. Here's a breakdown of that. You don't see any membranes in the side of here, but I did ask my classes in person, these are bacteria, and antibiotics kill bacteria, but they don't really hurt you as long as you're not taking too many of them and you're not allergic to them. So if we let's make a little pill here with an A on it for antibiotic. If we send this in here, what does it do? Do antibiotics kill bacteria? Are they somehow just going to shut them down? And the answer to that is no. Antibiotics don't kill bacteria. They disrupt the formation of their cell walls. So chemically they get in there and they interfere with bacteria creating cell walls. So if you're given antibiotics, make sure you take them all the way to the end. And a lot of times you'll see a warning label on your medicine bottle that says take this until it's gone, because bacteria can develop resistance to antibiotics, and that happens because when you first take the antibiotics and you feel better, you've kind of cut off the growth of the bacteria that are most susceptible to antibiotics. The ones that remain are the most resistant. So if you stop taking them, the resistant ones are going to start multiplying, and then eventually we may develop a strand of bacteria that's resistant to an antibiotic. When I did healthcare in the military, someone would come in with strep throat, and at the time, this was 25 years ago, the thought was a throat culture cost $100 to run. So by sending it to the lab and doing everything, it cost $100 to do a test to see if someone has strep bacteria in their throat. And the antibiotics to treat strep were only $3. So they used to say, you don't even run the test, just give them the antibiotics. And we've backed off of that now because we're starting to see bacteria develop antibiotic resistance, which is a form of evolution. All right. So here's an electron microscope picture of bacteria setting right next to a eukaryotic cell, and you can this is just to kind of compare size differences. So we're going to go ahead and end this history and sort of types of cells with prokaryotic and eukaryotic right here.